bookish friends, my name is Jackie and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to dive into my June wrap up. So these are all the books that I read in the month of June. Alright, so before I dive into each of the books, I'm going to share some of my stats for my reading this month. So first, I just wanted to mention that I had 9 books on my June TBR, and I read a total of 8 books this month. I also read a total of 2,447 pages. So the shortest book that I read this month was How to Catch a Wild Viscount, and that came in at 105 pages. The longest book I read this month was 440 pages, and that was The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. In terms of the genres that I read this month, all 8 of the books were adult books. There were 6 contemporary romances. This is subdivided into 5 LGBTQ plus romances. Specifically, there were 4 polyamorous romances. These were graphic novels that were in the same series, and 1 sapphic romance. And then also had 1 fake dating romance. This was a heterosexual couple. And then I had 1 literary fiction, and this featured some magical realism aspects in it, and 1 historical fiction, which I would also categorize as women's fiction, and it takes place in World War II France. In terms of the mediums that I read this month, I read 4 audiobooks. One of those 4 audiobooks was actually a combination read of audio and ebook, 4 physical reads, and 1 ebook, not including that combined audio and ebook read. So some of the moods this month were lighthearted, funny, emotional, and adventurous. I also just wanted to note that I read 1 second epilogue for When He Was Wicked. I didn't count this in any of my book read stats, but I did mark it as read on my Goodreads and my story graph. Okay, so the first book that I finished in the month of June was Funny Story by Emily Henry. This one was actually on my June TBR, and it was also on my May TBR and maybe one other one before that, so I'm glad to have finally read it. This is my first Emily Henry book, and I really enjoyed this one. It follows Daphne, who her fiance recently broke up with her, and she's kind of trying to navigate her life again after this has happened. She's rebuilding, she has to find a new place to live, so she moves in with her ex-fiance's girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, and they kind of clash. They're very different people. Daphne is a child librarian, so she doesn't have enough money to live on her own, so that's why they're living together. And then Miles is a little bit more chaotic. He has a bunch of different jobs going on. One of them is working at this bar, and they could not be more different, but I really love how she's kind of putting her life back together in this one. It wasn't quite a 5-star read for me, but it was almost there. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. I just fell in love with the story. I really connected with Daphne in this one. I loved all the scenes of her working within the library and with the children, and you could really see just how passionate she was about books. And of course, as a big reader, I always love reading about a main protagonist who loves books as well. And I just liked how the relationship between Daphne and Miles started as fake dating, and the way that they get together is really sweet. This is a little bit more of a slow burn. So they're fake dating, but really they're just friends, and they don't really become romantic until a little later in the story. I like the fact that they had time to get to know each other as friends first, so the romance didn't feel forced or rushed at all. I just adored the story. I feel like Miles is the perfect complement to Daphne. They were really good together, and I felt so bad for the way that Daphne's ex had treated her, especially when he comes crawling back later on in the book to try to get her back, but it's too late by then. And I just love all the hijinks that happen in this one. There's some storylines with Daphne and Miles's family in this one too, which added to a lot of the humor and hijinks. This one made me smile, it made me laugh, and it was just such a great time. And I think it really lived up to its name. Alright, so the next book that I read in the month of June is Boyfriends Volume 1 by Refrainbow. So this is an LGBTQ plus graphic novel, and it was previously published on Webtoons, and now it's being published in these bound editions by Wattpad. And I was very kindly sent the first 4 volumes of this graphic novel series from them, and I'm very grateful. So this one follows the polyamorous relationship of a jock, a nerd, a prep, and a goth, and this is them getting together for the first time. They're trying to navigate the challenges of being in a polyamorous relationship and what it means to be in that kind of relationship. None of them have experience with this before, so it's really interesting seeing them trying to put things together. I love how we get them connecting in this one, and the art style and drawings in this are just absolutely stunning. I loved it so much. I think that all of the sketches and the art were breathtaking, and that's where the true magic of this graphic novel series lies. I will say that I think that the characters were a little bit more archetypal in this one. They're very generic, so they're not given names or anything like that, so they don't have as much development in this volume as I would have liked, but I give it a pass because it's such a beautiful graphic novel. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I was glad to be introduced to the boyfriends. Alright, so next I read Boyfriends Volume 2 by Refrainbow. I also really enjoyed this one, and they're kind of navigating a new school year. They're all in college, so they're kind of trying to figure out their classes and all all of that, and they're trying to figure out how to balance their relationship with their other commitments like school, work, and football in this one. I thought this was really sweet. I think that you're starting to get a little bit more development for the boyfriends in this one, but like I said, the art and the illustrations in this were absolutely gorgeous. I think that was my absolute favorite part. Next, I read Boyfriends Volume 3, and this is where Prep and Goth are getting ready to graduate in this one. So they have to start making big decisions about their future and their next steps, and then we're wondering what's going to happen with their polyamorous relationship since two of the boyfriends are graduating. So there's a lot of things that they have to work through in this volume, but it was super cute, super sweet. I love how we get connected to the characters in this one, and I think that we're really starting to get to know them a little more. We get to meet some of the boyfriends' families in this one, and that was really sweet. So some friends of theirs and just other things happening in this. So it's going beyond their relationship and is dealing with some of the external conflicts that they face, but also building relationships with other people in this one. Next, I read Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this was her adult debut novel. She's previously only written YA, so this was her first time taking this on, and I thought it was really interesting. I really liked the magical realism aspects of it, and it follows Fleur, who has a gift. She can predict the day when someone will die, and she decides that she wants to have a living wake. So the plot of the story is really following all these sisters and some of their children as they're gearing up to this wake, and so she's going to plan this party for her family and her community to bring them together, but all the family is really wondering if she's foreseeing her death or someone else's, or does she have some other motive for getting everyone together, and she doesn't really share any details about it with her sisters. But we also find out that she's not the only one that has secrets. Her sister Matilde has tried for decades to cover her husband's infidelities, and she's also had some fertility issues. Pastora is usually the most reserved sister, but now in the lead up to the wake, she's really trying to resolve her sister's problems. And Camila is the youngest sibling, and she's often the forgotten one, and she decides that she no longer wants to be taken for granted by the rest of her family. We also follow Ona and Yadi, who are cousins from the next generation, and they're facing a lot of their own issues. Yadi is returning to her first love, who was in prison when they were children, and Ona has been married for years and has been struggling to conceive, so she has to decide if it's worth continuing to try to have a child. And she's also trying to work on some anthropology research that's not working very well. So in this book, we get some inserts of her interviews with the family, because she decides that her next anthropological project is going to be looking into her family's history, and she does a lot of work looking at the relationship dynamics of Dominican people. So I thought that was interesting. It brought a different light to the story, and I did listen to this on audiobook. So it was mainly narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo, but there were two other narrators who dropped in during these like interview sessions, and I thought that was intriguing. The multimedia aspect of it really gets you to analyze the family a little bit more. Like, we're weaving between past and present in the rest of the narrative, but in these interviews we're getting more of the characters' internal thoughts and feelings, and also them processing things in the present day, which I thought was really interesting. And we switch between Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and New York City. I thought it was a really fun, exciting magical realism read. I really appreciated the magical realism aspects of this, which was a relief, because I couldn't buy into the magical realism in One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, but I feel like this was something that I could suspend my disbelief more. It dives a little bit more into like Latinx mythology and that kind of stuff, which I think is more believable. Also, there isn't really anyone actually time traveling in this one, so their gifts are more based on like intuition, which I think is more believable overall. I had a really good time reading this book. I enjoyed diving into another one of Elizabeth Acevedo's works, and I'm working my way through the last couple of books in her backlist, but I really like this one. I wouldn't say I enjoyed this as much as her young adult novels, but it's still worth the read. Alright, my next June read was The Fiancée Farce by Alexandria Bellefleur. This is a contemporary sapphic romance, and it follows Tansy and Gemma. Tansy's greatest love is her family's bookstore, and this was passed down from her father, but she's never really had a serious relationship. She's tired about her stepfamily questioning her about her love life, so she invents a fake girlfriend inspired off of the cover of one of the books in this bookstore, and she thinks that they're never gonna meet her, so what's the harm in telling a little white lie? But then in real life, Gemma crosses paths with Tansy, and things kind of go from there. And we also get Gemma, who is a wild child. She's the outcast of a very rich family, and she's also the heir to Vandalian Publishing. But in order to inherit this prosperous publishing house, she must marry. That is a condition. And she discovers that this beautiful stranger has been saying that this is her long-term girlfriend, so she takes things one step further and announces their engagement. She needs a wife to meet the terms of her grandfather's will, and Tansy needs money to save the struggling bookstore, and so they basically want to enter into a marriage of convenience in this one. They think that they can fool everyone into thinking that this is a love match, and then in a couple of years get divorced. But then suddenly this convenient arrangement becomes something more, and they start to develop real feelings for each other. And meanwhile, Gemma's family is plotting behind the scenes to try to stop her from inheriting this publishing house. It was a really sweet, sapphic romance. I think this story was really an ode to bookstores, libraries, and the romance genre as a whole, especially historical romances. I really liked all the nods and references that were in here to classic romance novels. I thought that the premise was really interesting, and the way that they meet at this wedding at the beginning of the novel was super fun. I loved how outgoing and confident Gemma is, and how she just exudes this vibrant energy. And then Tansy's a little bit more soft-spoken. She's a little bit more of that quiet book nerd, and I really saw a lot of myself in Tansy. Their relationship was fake for a long time, so they decided that they're gonna be friends with benefits at the beginning, and then they slowly develop feelings. Again, I think this is a little bit more of a slow burn, even though they get engaged at the very beginning of the book, and I appreciated that the relationship built over time. I just loved Alexandria Bellefleur's writing in this one. I definitely have to check out some more books that she's written, but this was a really fun, sweet, and lighthearted sapphic romance. I also read The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. This was a buddy read with Isabel, so thank you so much to Isabel for reading this with me. I had a really good time reading it, and it takes place in 1939 France, so it's during World War II, and we are under the Nazi occupation. So we follow two sisters, Vian and Isabel. Vian is trying to keep her family together and just live as normal a life as possible given the difficult circumstances. Meanwhile, Isabel is a little bit more rebellious, and she ends up joining the French resistance. There's so much that happens in this book. It's a real tearjerker, and I think that this was really a story of sacrifice, of love, and kind of discovering the way that war affects everyone. I don't want to share too many more details because I will be doing a live discussion of this with Isabel on her channel, so if you're interested in hearing more of our thoughts, you can check that out on her page. So if you're interested in hearing more about this book, you can check out our live. Alright, so next I read Boyfriends Volume 4 by Refrainbow, and this is following the boyfriends again. This time they're finally moving in together after the end of the previous volume, and they're navigating a lot of personal insecurities in this one, their gender identity and expression, and accepting love from one another. It was a really beautiful volume. I like that we get more exploration into their internal lives in this one, and we also get some more information about Prep and Goss' past relationship because they were childhood best friends before entering this polyamorous romance. And it was just a really sweet, fun graphic novel. I love the art illustrations in this one. These were perfect reads for Pride Month, but you can dive into them at any time of the year. I also wanted to briefly mention that at the very beginning of the month, I reread the When He Was Wicked second epilogue. I have read this before a couple of times, and I was feeling like I was getting into a little bit of a slumpy reading mood, so I picked this up. It's just super short, super sweet. I think it was like 20 pages or something like that, but I didn't really count it. And it's really beautiful. We get to see Francesca and Michael 3 years after the events of When He Was Wicked and their relationship. We also get discussion of Francesca's infertility in this one. I love being back with the Bridgertons in this one, and I just appreciated seeing the whole family together. They are one of my favorite literary families of all time, and in the wait for Bridgerton season 4 to come out, it was the perfect thing to dive into. Finally, I wanted to briefly talk about the historical romance novella that I read, and it was How to Catch a Wild Viscount by Tessa Dare. I have now read all of Tessa Dare's novellas, and I'm slowly working my way through her backlist. I think I only have 5 or 6 of her books left to read, but this is very short. It was like 105 pages, and it follows Viscount Merritt, who has returned from war as a changed man. Battle has stripped away his civility, and he feels like there's no charm or tenderness to him anymore, and he really has nothing to offer to anyone romantically. And we also follow Cecily Hale. She isn't a girl any longer. She has become a woman in the last few years, and she's not one to be easily pushed away. She and Luke are guests at a house party, and a local legend captures their friend's imagination, and so they all head into the forest trying to chase down this mythological creature, and Cecily's trying to win the Viscounts. So she only has a few nights to try to win him over. She knows that he still has a heart even after all the trauma that he faced in battle. This was a really interesting one. The beginning was a little tough to get into. I wasn't sure if I liked how the supernatural aspects of this were playing out. This was also the first thing that Tessa Dare had ever written and was published, and it showed in the writing style. Her later books definitely get better than this, and this is the prequel to the Wanton Dairymaid series, but it just felt a little bit disjointed to me. I'm not sure. I didn't really love the beginning of it. I like the ending and the conclusion and how the theme of this is that everyone is worthy of love, but I'm not entirely sure I love the execution of it in practice. I mainly read it just to say that I could mark it off from my list of Tessa Dare books, but I would probably skip this one and just read her fuller length novels or other novellas that she's written because those were definitely better in my opinion. This one was just okay. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. Have you read any of these books, or are you planning on reading any of these books? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd also love to hear what books you ended up reading in the month of June. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and if you like this video, please feel free to give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you are doing well, and and I'll see you for the next one. Bye!